I'd like to call the work session to order for November 18th, 2024. Read the roll call. We're all here.
All members are present.
All right. We have one item on the agenda tonight. We'd like to remind council the staff will be pausing every so often to answer questions. Item to review development continuum streamline process. Katie, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Katie Wilkin, Development Services Director. And I'll be joined with this presentation by Rourke Massey, our City Attorney. And we are going to be discussing improvements to the development continuum. This is aligned with a strategic plan item under our focus area of economic vitality, and we have been charged to evaluate processes to streamline the development timelines. And that was assigned to both the Development Services and Legal Services departments. And so we have a few items that our departments have worked on together recently to let you know what we've been doing. And with that, I'll hand it over to Roy.
And the first item we'll review tonight, and just thank you, Katie, for over the last few months after the strategic plan item was assigned, we had some fruitful conversations about areas that we could streamline, and one of the items was that we first looked at was development agreements. And what we wound up doing was putting together a standard operating procedure for the development agreement process, which we had not had in the past. We had a process that we've used for many, many years, but this gave us a chance to go back and really dive in and validate whether or not that process was the most efficient way to work through development agreements. And as we all know, development agreements are long-term agreements that the city enters into between the city and proposed development in the city. Usually there's a condition that warrants a development agreement or a pathway outside of our normal processes. And it's usually that the development is not adjacent to existing infrastructure, needs roads, water lines, sewer lines. It's not ordinarily served by our public safety. We need to evaluate the needs for fire service or police service. So they're complicated agreements that you have to work through with the developer that has obligations on both the developer side and the city side. And again, you need to look through a looking glass and over the next whatever that time horizon is. But many of these agreements, again, run 15 to 20 years. So we started the process by reviewing our internal DA processes for efficiencies or inefficiencies that we could identify. We reached out to other similarly sized high growth communities to determine whether or not they had SOPs, and the answer was they did not. And they would like to see what we have and would like a copy when we're done. So we will provide that. We process mapped the DA process. We worked through step by step. How does a DA originate and move through the city review process and negotiation process with our developer partners. We coordinated that with the city's development agreement coordinator, who's currently located in the city manager's office, and had great assistance from Brandy Scott in developing the SOP. And finally, after we drafted the SOP, we circulated that through the departments that are ordinarily involved in the development process for their comments, which were generally included in the SOP, and then had sign-off and agreement and support by the city manager's office on the final version, which was circulated to council on October 1st with our report of the strategic plan initiative. So in reviewing the SOP, generally, I guess if there's a theme of the SOP, it really is keeping momentum. And to keep the process moving on the city side. We can only control what happens on the city side of the transaction because these are negotiated agreements between interested parties. But from the city and our internal service providers, the developer has to answer to their shareholders. They have to work with their finance partners. So there's really many partners involved in getting a development agreement across the finish line. But again, I think our SOP is focused on keeping the momentum going on the city side, which we haven't had that formalized process in the past. So it is, I guess, in discussions with Katie, what we like about it, and reflecting back, it really establishes a proactive process rather than a reactive process. So if you follow the proposed SOP, By the time the city's met with the developer for the first time, we have had internal meetings and formulated the city's interests that we can share at that first meeting, rather than walk into a meeting with a developer and have some general ideas, but not fleshed out city interests that can be presented to the developer on the front end of the transaction. I think if you review the SOP, which was attached to the CAR report this evening, I think most of the focus and benefit of the draft SOP, or the SOP, really starts in the step 3 of the process. Because after the application is filed with the city, there are requests that the developer, high level, give us what their interests are, or what issues need to be addressed in the development agreement. Then there's timelines. The clock starts ticking on the city side. Get those interested parties and departments together within a certain established time frame and start working through the city interests. And so we have that list identified early on in the process. And typically those partners are obviously development services, water department, engineering, parks, PD, fire, finance gets involved. Get all of those parties at the table and the city manager's office and start having those discussions early on. The step 3 also identifies the city's lead negotiator. So we have one person responsible for negotiating the transaction on the part of the city. Doesn't have to be the attorney's office. I would say likely it's going to be a deputy city manager who's going to take the lead in the process. It also, this SOP, vests a lot of the coordination in the development agreement coordinator, who's located in the city manager's office, who can bring, I guess, the gravitas of the city manager's office in pulling all the interested departments together and getting that information and that decision-making, that evaluation in one place. So that's a crucial role, and I think I've called that just going to shepherd the DA along, or quarterback it. You pick which you like better. But that's going to be a critical role. And there was some discussion prior to the new development agreement coordinator's position being relocated to the city manager's office about a year ago. Was that the best place for that position to be located? Because it's been in DSD, it's been in finance, but really it needs to be at the city manager's level to really pull these various departments together and help keep these discussions moving along. So I think that was a good decision made at the city manager level. The SOP, if you work your way through it, at each step along the way, it does establish a timeline or time frame for the next piece of work that needs to be accomplished. If you have 10 days, you have 5 days, and it really, historically, we have a meeting with the developer, we have discussions, you have follow-up items, but you don't have a definitive time frame on getting that next level, that next deliverable. So the SOP, again, I think that the theme is keeping momentum of the transaction. And again, we just talked about accountability for timeframes. There are requirements in the city attorney's office for creating the draft once we've reached some level of agreement, which I think we put 15 days in there. I really think that's actually going to be quicker than that, but we need to account for other work that's already in the pipeline. And just once you start writing a development agreement, it's hard to move on. It's not something you can jump into and out of, so you really have to set aside a certain number of days of work for the attorney to work through the process. And we've taken ownership. We're going to create the drafts of the DAs. In the past, sometimes it started with the developer doing the first draft and then came over to us. We're going to try to, we have a pretty good file of DAs that council's found agreeable in the past in the language and terminology. So we're going to take ownership of drafting the first DA at the appropriate time in the SOP process. So in summary, the process establishes deadlines. It's an accountability on the part of the city and the city staff to keep the process moving. It's all about keeping momentum in the process. We can control those elements that we can control, and that's on the city side of the transaction. But we do have the support of the various departments and the city manager's office, and we will commit to following the SOP process as presented. With that, thank you. The next section.
The second improvement we worked on together was the final plat improvement, which we just came to council for that final approval last month. Making the final plats and easements an administrative review and approval process. That was effective November 7th, so we haven't had a lot of cases come through under this new process yet. But I can tell you that we've been receiving a lot of positive feedback from our customers. They're very appreciative to City Council for making that change. If you remember, Phoenix and Queen Creek did it first. It was led by the League of Cities model ordinance, so we certainly weren't first to go out there, but we are one of the leaders in this area. And I just met with the Home Builders Association last week, and he said he is really talking up Goodyear in the development community, especially for this issue, and they are just greatly appreciative of this. What it's already been doing for us is we are working with our customers, and they often have closing dates or a financing date, and it just gives us an easier time of trying to schedule out, okay, if you get this to us here, we'll be able to get it recorded for you here without having the council meeting to work through. So it is going to be a streamlined process.
And next, I'll speak about real estate relocation, but just on the previous slide, and I think it's referenced in the report, that over the last couple of years with DSD, in partnership with legal, we've had developed a number of stipulations standard to the plat review process. So under the new process, unless there's a specific need for legal services, legal is no longer involved in the platting process. So certainly saving the time that previously was used in the plat review process. The third thing we looked at was the location of the real estate division. For the past 7 or 8 years, that's been located in the legal department. Previously, it was located in the engineering department. The real estate professionals work on easements, dedication, plats. They were supervised by the deputy city attorney who works in the development field. Talking to city manager's office and engineering, we evaluated whether legal was really the most efficient place for that work group to be. And just in discussions with the engineering director, he had a vision for putting kind of a pod of that support with the 2 real estate professionals, a land surveyor, because a lot of times you're trying to develop legal descriptions. That's work group was going to be together. So the work is not bouncing back and forth from the development continuum back up to the legal department. So the thought was there are efficiencies to be realized by moving that group back to the engineering department, and it was moved as of October 1st, those 2 individuals. And that will also free up time that the deputy city attorney had in supervising that work group. So again, projects not bouncing back and forth between departments, the support staff, real estate support professionals closer to the work, and not having as much legal review of that work. There's a lot of standard stipulations and agreements that we put together over the last few years. So the need for continual legal support in that work function is not necessary.
The final improvement development services and legal worked on together was looking at our rezoning and use permit process. And I know several of you, perhaps all of you, at one time or another have received a frantic phone call from one of our customers saying they have planning commission in a day or 2 and they're upset with some of the stipulations we provided them, and there's some negotiation happening last minute and that's causing frustration. So we have looked at this process, and again, some of it's related to what Rourke said before, that we have spent a lot of years creating standard stipulations, so we have a lot of this information already. But also, most of the stipulations we put on rezoning are infrastructure related, and so we do know those up front. So under our new process, what we're gonna do is staff will identify all those infrastructure requirements that are stipulations, and we will provide those to our customers at first review. They won't be in legal terms. It'll say something simply like, you will be required to improve the half street next to your property. You'll improve Citrus Road. You'll need to provide 25% of a traffic signal. whatever that is, but it gets the point across of what the obligation is. And that way staff and the customer can work through these items, make sure we're on the same page of what's going to be required and why. And then when the project comes back in for second review, we're gonna then route it to legal so that legal can put it into the legal terminology. And so then after second review, we'll be able to provide the customer with the finalized stipulations already. And then we won't add any additional stipulations unless they're requested by the customer, basically. And so we think that that is going to be an immense improvement. I've already spoken with several of our city attorney customers about it, not city attorneys, sorry, zoning attorneys, customers about it. And they are really excited for the process. We have one rezoning in now that we're trying it out with. And so again, it doesn't change the obligations they have to do, but it changes when we're discussing these requirements, so it's not a frustrating mad dash at the end. It's something that happens up front when we have plenty of time to work through all the details. Next, I did want to go through a few other improvements that Development Services has been working on alone, so these are processes that aren't necessarily directly related to legal. And the first is we are going to be having several code updates coming to council next year. The first being we are going to do a comprehensive update of the zoning ordinance. We have not done a comprehensive update since 1999. This is in the strategic plan. The example I always like to give is that typewriter repair is one of our permitted uses in our zoning ordinance. But there are some real challenges, such as, you know, our industrial districts were written for industries that were being built in the 1990s. And so the building heights don't work for the technology that industry is using today. And that's why you see so many PADs. And creating PADs is costly and makes the development review timeline longer. So updating the zoning ordinance to modernize it, and of course, if we're going to increase height, making sure we're doing appropriate buffers to residential. That's why we want to look at the whole thing comprehensively. So this is going to impact the development timeline too by having a zoning ordinance that works for our customers' needs. We will be reaching out to council and the development community early 2025 to get your initial items that you might want to make sure we're addressing in the zoning ordinance, and of course items that our customers want to make sure we're addressing. We're also working on the engineering design standards and policy manual. And similar, we're updating it. It hasn't had a comprehensive update in several years, so we're working with our internal operations departments to make sure we have all the items. And again, it is another streamline item, because if the codes and ordinances are clear, then our customers know what they need to do to get through approval quickly. And finally, we're also updating the building code. And this is really important too, because the larger cities update the building code regularly. The 2024 codes just came out, and it's really beneficial, especially to the home builders, when Goodyear stays on the same building code as the other cities. So that way, when they get their home plans through one city, they don't have to make a whole bunch of changes when they're coming to Goodyear. Perhaps they've already been approved, they're on the same building code, so when they come to Goodyear, they don't have to make a bunch of modifications to fall under our building code. So again, it's a way to streamline and help the development community out. The other major thing we're working on is how we communicate with our projects and project management. You know, one of the things as I speak to our customers, I hear is, you know, sometimes it feels like they can submit and then they don't hear anything and they just want to know what's going on. So with our projects, we are making sure we have a project manager clearly assigned to every case. We're also doing proactive project scheduling. So not just the review times that are on our website, but when are we actually going to get it done based on the current staffing available, holidays, anything else going on. And then we're doing proactive communication. So we just went through a rapid improvement event a few weeks ago to really outline this process. So for all of these projects, when they submit, they're going to get an email from their project manager saying, hello, my name is Katie, and I'm your project manager, so if you have any questions throughout the process, you feel free to reach out to me. You can expect your review comments back the week of such and such date, and let's go ahead and get a comment review meeting scheduled now because we know we're going to get you your review comments. And in my talking to our customers, they think that alone is going to make a big improvement of just getting that proactive communication, so we're kind of starting there. We've also been doing a lot of trying to coordinate on some of our larger projects. We have a lot of projects such as GSQ, Lakin Park, Lincoln Properties, that are major projects that have multiple buildings going on and a lot of off-site infrastructure, and there's just a lot of moving pieces. So we have a project coordinator. Our current project coordinator is Kanani Amananse, and I can tell you already, when our customers see her come into a meeting, they get so excited because they know they're going to get some really great communication and have a single point of contact. So what she's doing is pulling information on here's all the different permits you have going on, and some of the timing too, that we need you to get this plan approved before we can issue this permit, to make sure that the customer really understands it. And especially making sure the property owner customer knows it, because sometimes we're working with an architecture firm or an engineering firm, and there's disjointed pieces of the project, and nobody's communicating with the property owner, the developer. And so what we're trying to do now is spend more time communicating with the developer of the project. And I kind of relate it, you know, in the city, we talk a lot about our whole employee wellness. Well, we're talking about the wellness of our project, so it's kind of whole project. What's everything going on with someone's project, and what do they need to do to get it across the finish line? And then where we're looking at for our future project improvements, well, I think you're all aware that there were some state statutes passed that required providing information on review timeframes. So we're definitely going to be taking a look at that and make sure that Goodyear isn't an outlier in some area. And if we are, that is definitely going to be an area that we will prioritize focusing on next year. But the major thing we want to do is connect with our customers and find out from them where they want us to focus our improvement efforts next year. So one thing we're doing, we've always had a quarterly development advisory forum, but during the pandemic, we went via Teams on it, and we're bringing it back in person. And you know, we used to do like a little breakfast snacks, and it was a time for us to connect with the customers and put names to faces and build those relationships. So we're bringing that back. We also want to, it's usually staff talking at the customer, and we want to make sure we build time into these development advisory forums for the customers to tell us what's going on, give us feedback on what's working and what's not working. Again, I mentioned I met with the Home Builders Association. They want to do some roundtables with staff to let us know what's working and not working. So that's where our focus is right now, is basically scheduling these different connections with our customers. And then our hope is out of there, we'll get the priority list from them of, you know, focus on this area of improvement first, then work on this one. And then that's what will be, that'll be our charge next year for continuing our process improvements. So again, just to summarize, the projects in line with the strategic plan that Development Services and Legal implemented, the final plat improvement process, the rezoning stipulations, and the development agreements. I do want to reiterate again that we are tracking those improvements. So we are going to track the review timeframes and make sure that we get the results we hoped for. And we will be happy to provide that to you next year after we have some projects go through this new process and let you know how these improvements we've presented to you tonight are working. And that concludes our presentation, so we'd be happy to get any feedback.
Before we start, just a couple quick ones before we get going. You're reaching out with the home builders and the developers and whatever. It'd be nice when you're talking to them, because I suspect this next legislative session, there's going to be a variety of, you know, legislation to go in there trying to take some of this away from us that we're doing. And I want to make sure that you know, the message gets out to the Home Builders Association, et cetera, that we're working to streamline and we're working to make those improvements. I've already had some talking with some of the developers, you know, about what's going on in there, and let them know that, you know, I know there are bad actors out there. I understand that. But we're trying not to be one of those bad actors, so we need to just make sure that information is out there when you're meeting with them, and ask them to please forward that when they see these bills come in through there, want to take some of that stuff away from us, which would be nice. And then just one for the attorney, when you're doing the development agreements, you've got stuff going back and forth. Are you tracking the date, the time you send it back to, say, the developer, and how long it takes for them to get it back to you?
Well, that's one of the things we'll be tracking moving forward.
Okay. Because I think it's important. Sometimes we'll get something and they'll say, hey, what's going on? Well, it was sent back to you. And it's, I know when we had some problems with some of the improvements, say for out in Australia, and what happened is their architect was sitting on it. So it's nice to have that detail in there. So when they call back in, it says, wait a minute, your architect's had it for 2 weeks. Wait a minute. He says, you're sitting on it. So the fact that you have that audit trail and you're showing what you're doing on there, I think is real important to have in our repertoire as well. So.
And that's kind of the intent on our end on the SOP is we'll be tracking those times.
Okay, please do. All right, with that, go ahead and open it up. What do I got? We'll go with Councilmember Gillis first. You're not on.
There you go.
Okay. Katie, I am so glad that they're getting back to, COVID's over, so I'm glad we're getting back to the one-on-ones. That was mentioned at a developers meeting that a couple of us went to last week. And there's a lot of stuff, I'm not gonna say who with, what city, but there was a lot of stuff that was going on that wasn't favorable. I'm glad it wasn't Goodyear. So, because we've had our share. And, but I know that was one of the important things is answering phones, one-on-ones, keeping up to date so that they have people that they know who they are, they see them, they have the relationship with them. So, thank you, because that, just last week, they were talking about this. And I think that one-on-one thing is really important, especially as we're gonna move forward now with everything going to explode, hopefully, but, go crazy here. I think that's gonna be important. How often are you going to do that?
Thank you. The Development Advisory Forum specifically is quarterly, but we're happy to connect with our customers in lots of different ways.
But the one-on-one thing that you're talking about, that's
Yeah.
quarterly? Okay, that's something I want to get back to them and let them know. Thanks.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together and going through it. Did you guys go through this lean process to help get to this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It looked like it, so yeah, no, thank you for going through that. Definitely will help the team with morale and helping with the users, end user also, and both sides of the users along the way. So thank you for that. And is there only one DAC, or are they cross-trained? Is there more than one DAC coordinator?
There's one development agreement coordinator that reports to the city manager's office, yes.
Okay, is there, if that person's not there, or they're sick 1 week, is there someone that can pick up for that person, or?
Thank you, council member. Yes, they do typically reach out to development services staff, because oftentimes when there's a development agreement, there's also a rezoning case. So if they need something in a timely manner, then that they're usually able to reach out to development services staff if they need a piece of information or an update.
Yeah, I'm just looking for single point vulnerabilities. If one person is the only person that's coordinating, and then that person's not there, doesn't show up to work the next day or something,
Absolutely.
then we're still tracking what they're doing on us. I don't know if you have a system. Do you have a system that you're tracking everybody as they're going through the processes, or going through like a SharePoint or something that?
Yes, we do have a system for the development agreement tracking.
Okay, and are there push notifications? I know you're burden me communicating more with them. Is there any auto pushes? I know you're gonna email, hey, I'm your DAC, or I'm your person tracking this. Is there any auto push, like you go through like a hurdle, different segments of the process, and then it notifies them automatically?
Yeah, well, thank you. There is a little bit of difference. The development agreement process does run a little slightly different than like review of rezonings and site plans and improvement plans. Our project review software does have push notifications. Even if the customer hasn't resubmitted in a while, it will remind them, hey, we haven't received a submittal.
Yeah.
Do you want to resubmit? So we have that all set up in our system. And certainly the development agreements, as they come in, they are going to get a project number and tracked this just like our other projects, but some of it works through the development agreement coordinator too.
Yeah, a lot of project management, so I'm just curious if
Absolutely.
there's anything that you can take from that job function and apply it to here, just make them as auto as possible, just for everybody's sake. And then, so it looks like it will be faster, but will it be faster process, or are these the numbers? So look at the the sheet, there's like 5 days and 7, is that the normal, do you feel like it is right now, or would that, I think it'll be faster with all this with all the coordination? I assume it will be, but I was just curious if you think it will be faster.
I think that, I mean, Rourke may have some thoughts too. I think that most of the development agreements will be faster. We're still gonna have certain development agreements, especially tied to large master plan communities,
Yeah.
that just have some complex issues that take time. And sometimes we're waiting for information from, you know, state agencies and
Yeah.
others that we don't fully control the timeline. But we do a lot of development agreements that are a little bit more simple, and I especially think for those, this new process is gonna make a big impact.
Yeah, no, I like the formalized process, and looking through it. I think it's not so step 9 that legal gets involved, I think, in that process as well, which I think seems appropriate. So, but yeah, no, I like that we're coordinating with internally, so we're not siloed, that we actually are coordinating with each other, so then we can help the end user and then help our internal customers also, to make sure that everybody knows what's going on, the process is streamlined and smooth, and everybody can get to the end result of helping getting the project across the finish line. So, no, thank you. I like that it's tracking as well, so we can also to see where it's at. And I don't know if if I'm a developer, can I go online and be like, okay, my project's right here, and the next step is here? Do we have that also, or is it just the notifications that'll happen?
Thank you. They can go online and see project status.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's great. And I know we'll keep getting better and better, just the lean process as well. So, yeah, thank you to your team for looking and making it, looking for opportunities to make it better and better. So, thank you.
Vice Mayor Kano?
I was one of the, oh, do you want to go?
No,
All right.
No, you're up.
I was one of the people who did ask for this to come to a work session because it's such a critical issue. And certainly, as electeds, we get a lot of feedback when we're interacting with developers and planning and zoning attorneys. And I don't think it's unique to Goodyear. I think a lot of cities are, but, and we also got slammed with so much work and so much development, you didn't really have time to take those introspective looks until now. And you probably still don't have the time, but it wasn't working for you. We were getting so far bogged down, and it was really becoming problematic. So this deep dive into all these processes is certainly very efficient. Just looking at the development agreement standards, the SOPs, I appreciate moving from reactive to proactive. I think that's a huge plus. Thank you for, Rorik, for going over what really constitute the need for a DA, because I wasn't sure that I knew that information. So that was definitely very helpful. And you're right, some are simple and some are complex. And I know you've made a timeline, but that might not work exactly for those deeper, more complex. And I just want to make sure you've got something in place that things don't get stuck or get lost. And you know, keeping track of those things are going to be really critical. You know, just as the thing has gone back and forth between legal and development services, I think we've generally heard from people, which then goes to the city manager, which then eventually rolls to you, and then sorting out whose shop is really things fall in, I think is an important look that we haven't done before, because then if it's legal, then we can look to Rorik more directly and say that that's where things are. Now, I see that you are going to do just a quick summary. So legal will draft the DA, and then planning will negotiate it, or the designated negotiator, which could be the deputy city manager, correct?
It could be. What the SOP calls out for is getting the interested
Just
parties
designating
together on the
somebody.
front end and designate who that might be.
That's critical.
I mean, yeah.
Good. Okay, and then we did talk about timeline accountability, but not sure really what that meant in terms of you have that coordinator who's tracking, and so how is that follow-up going to happen? I mean, is she go to the city manager, go to the city attorney? I mean, what will be that accountability?
Well, the SOP that we've all agreed to establishes timeframes for certain pieces of work. So that is the timeframe we've all agreed to. And if we're missing that timeframe, city manager's office as the development agreement coordinator, and I would assume we'll have some discussions about where we're falling short.
Okay. So that person's definitely going to be empowered to speak up and act on those kinds of things. Good, that's really important. Then final plats, I know that this was a long work in progress, and I know that council was a part of being hesitant to give it up, but I'm glad we have. I think that's a very simple fix that we've done and will make a big difference. The real estate relocation to engineering, will the transactions that happen, will they still have to be reviewed by legal?
So, some will, and we're continuing to have those discussions as to what needs to go to legal. As many of them result in contracts, and under the charter, the city attorney has to review and approve all contracts. So those will still go to legal, but what I'm trying to do is keep the ordinary easements, dedications, those projects that we've already developed standard templates for. Let's not require further legal review unless something is out of the ordinary. And then it's not going to legal by a matter of course. It's only through a legal services request instigated by the engineering department. So,
Okay, very good. I think that would seem like a very logical move. Looking at the rezoning and use timeline permits, so your shop will do the first review, and then it goes to legal. If there's any changes or something was missed, then is there going to be coordination and communication? Or I just want to make sure that it doesn't fall now solely on legal. You're brought up to speed on any changes. Is that the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So our staff will provide legal, kind of the plain English bullet points
Right.
of here's the stipulations, and then legal will give those to us directly. So
Okay.
they'll give them to the development services staff.
Very
So we'll
good.
have a chance to familiarize ourselves with them first, and then we'll share them with the customer.
in the direction's been at the legal review, the second review that is our in-depth legal review. So there should be nothing we discover later that should not have been discovered at the second review. So as Katie referenced, any changes after that point are at the request of the customer.
Okay, good. With the additional work that, Katie, you're doing on the zoning ordinance update, I think that's a great move. How long will that take, do you think?
I think it's going to probably take a good, most of next year.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And are you going to designate a time period then to do regular and routine? I mean, it was a long time, 24, 25 years is a long time in a fast-changing world, so maybe tick the calendar again within the next decade or something.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. And then you have a lot of key current improvement projects, which I think are going to be helpful. I think communication is always a key. And you've always had an active part in engaging the stakeholders, which I think, strengthens that relationship. Like Vicki said, I'm very glad you're going to do those meetings now in person. And so I wanted to ask you, Warwick, if legal's going to be a part of any of those discussions, or are you going to engage the stakeholders directly as well?
We've never been invited.
We will invite you to breakfast. You can come.
I can go. I can come to breakfast. Sure.
Awesome.
I think that would be great, because I think for you to hear firsthand, some of the things, and that will help to see problems from all the different points of view. And just because you've never done it, it's a good time to start something new. So,
Can
all right,
teach
thank you
this
for the
old dog
time.
new tricks, maybe.
Appreciate it.
Councilmember Stipp?
Thank you. Katie and Rourke, thanks for the work. I know it sounds like there's been a lot of things that kind of came out of this, and since we didn't break in between, I think I'm probably going to be all over the place. But let's talk about, Vice Mayor brought up timeline accountability. So we talked about the process that you've laid out in the SOP has timeline requirements in it. But we're putting the onus on the city manager's office designee, who's the development agreement coordinator, to call that out. And that's great when the problem resolves in the city manager's purview. but when the problem is in legal, how are we gonna get a non-legal person? This is how we got into this situation in the first place. We have the two charter offices of the manager's office and the attorney. And we have, as a council, I think, at least for the last 5 years, have put a tremendous amount of pressure on the manager's office about getting these processes put through. And then it became apparent that we have probably put as much pressure there as we can, and we didn't put any on the legal side. So how do we make sure that legal is holding up their end of the bargain on this deal? I mean, you know what I'm saying? We've got
Sure. Well,
somebody who doesn't report to you who's gonna call you out and.
Well, I think the answer to that is we're going to track the steps and the required timeframe. So we should be able to generate reports that show where we're meeting it or not meeting it, and then we can certainly make that available to council to review. And if we're having issues or we're falling short in certain areas, we can identify where that is. But I certainly plan on holding myself and my staff to the timeframes we've agreed to. We had a lot of discussion and push and pull on what is reasonable in certain areas, and got to a point where I think we can make those timeframes. Although some of them are going to be aggressive, because people, this does put the onus on multiple areas of the organization to come together within fairly short timeframes and be responsive to the developers. So I think we can track these steps. They're pretty clearly defined on what the next deliverable is, and I think we can probably generate reports on that.
You know, it was, I was kind of reminiscent of the conversations that we had, I want to say 1,000,000 years ago, but I mean, it wasn't that far. But I'm going to look at the mayor. When we were asking about the generic public safety overtime, or we were asking about what's going on at the ballpark. I mean, these are 2011, 2012, 2013 conversations. They're 10 plus years old now. But every quarter, every 6 months, we were getting a report on where we were and what was happening. And I think given the pressure that we are feeling, and it should not just be a pressure from the development community, because this conversation can be spun in a direction that, well, the people who are making the investment are putting the pressure on the electeds, and that's not the case. Because now we are finding that pressure is coming from the legislature, and that pressure is coming from the business community as a whole. So this conversation isn't just about one or two specific developers anymore. It is about the industry and what is happening. And we talk about the time and how that goes through. And one of the things that came up the other morning at breakfast was, another week's delay on a project that somebody has borrowed $50 or $100 million to finance. Another week of interest payments is pretty significant. So for us, we go, it's only 5 days, it's not a big deal. But 5 days of interest payments on $100 million is a lot. That's a big bottom line hit, and then that just repeats itself over and over again. Or they anticipated getting out of the ground in 2022, and here it is 2024, and they're still not out yet. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of pressures that building as an industry are kind of coming under. So I think us being responsive to that level of accountability is going to be really, really important. And I would just encourage the future councils to look at this and say, we don't want to wait for an annual report. We need to get this more often, see where we are baseline, and then see how this thing kind of materializes. And the reason that comes up is if you look at the report that was generated on the municipality timeframe that we were given back, I'm trying to figure out what day it is now, but I think it was the beginning of October when we got that report that is required to go to the state. I asked for the summary of, hey, what do all the rest of the municipalities look at? And the answer that came back from that was, well, we don't know. Nobody knows what the answers to those questions are, because there's not a defined, we haven't defined the parameters for what the report's supposed to. I'm like, this is a state required report. How do we not know what that is? So the state hasn't figured it out, so therefore we can't figure it out. I mean, so we're trapped in this endless loop of this reporting. But all that to say, we have generated our own internals, and I think we've got to have some responsibility for that. So, let me start at the beginning with the with the final plats, I know we have gone through that final plat process. Were there any, we took it away from the responsibility for council, which is good. Did staff do anything to speed up the process on your guys' end for final plats? I mean, was there anything that, besides not sending it to council, that needed to happen?
Well, as Rourke said, we're not sending it to legal during the review cycles either, so there is staff savings there. We are still working through all the details of the process, but the big thing is we typically final plats come in with some sort of like civil improvement plans, so we're able to align the final plat with the civil improvement plans.
Okay, and then we talk about, in that report that you guys sent out on October 1st, we talked about the phrase, "our stated timeline," is repeated a number of times throughout that document. But I don't know, and I don't think anybody sitting up here knows, what are those stated timelines, number one, and then number two, are we meeting them today? Because if we're not meeting them today, I think we ought to know that, and we ought to understand where we're at. Are we starting 3 feet behind the ball, or are we starting, football, today's Monday, so are we starting on the line of scrimmage, or are we behind? Do we know?
We have published review times, well, and of course, it has to be complicated. There's two versions of stated timeframes, because there's if you remember when the Regulatory Bill of Rights got passed, there's the timeframes we have to, which everyone kind of created kind of the worst case scenario timeframes. So those are out there, but that's not our goal timeframe. But we do have review times, cycle times, like a first review, posted on our website, so we can absolutely get you a copy of that. We have been pulling data on where we are. We did just move to a new system earlier this year, so we definitely have it for like the last 6 months. So we can provide that to City Council, no problem. It has been harder to pull that from the time especially from the time you first talk to us to the time you get your building permit or get your C of O. That's always been a challenge, to just tie the different pieces together. So we're still working on how to do that in a way so we can get customers good information, and so we can look at our own processes ourselves. So that might be a little tougher to get for you, but we can provide whatever we have, yeah.
And I think the reason I want to talk about that is we get those, I don't want to say random phone calls, 'cause sometimes they're not random, but we'll get those phone calls. Hey, we're 6 months behind, we're blah, blah, blah. If we have a better understanding of how that is, then we can respond to that better as electeds. So it's not always a staff-driven responsibility, that if they're reaching out to us, I can virtually guarantee everybody that if a developer is reaching out to an elected, they are at the last straw moment. So if we're getting it, it's helpful if we understand how that whole thing works. So I think all that part is really good. The rezoning and special use question and component is we talk about development services staff and the customer will be those stipulations will be sent to legal services for review and finalization. Will that process hold up the second review if they're not fully, if those stipulations aren't fully vetted? You see what I'm saying? To Brandon's point, there was critical point of failure.
No, we will send the customer the other comments. So if we had engineering comments on their water report and they need to get those done, we'll send those on so that they can be working on it and
So if you've got 15
coordinating.
stipulations
Yeah.
and you're only hiccuping on 3 of them, you're gonna send them 12 and say, we're still waiting on these 3? Is that,
Yeah, I don't foresee a situation like that. I foresee legal usually turns things around pretty quickly when we give them the draft. It's more, it'd probably be pieces like, the review and development services done, but maybe the legal review isn't done, or vice versa. But we will coordinate on that.
so the whole idea of stipulations being reviewed by legal at all where does that come from? Because I think that's unique to Goodyear.
I don't think we're specifically talking just about stipulations. I know we're talking about a piece of it, reviewing stipulations that are not standard, but there's certainly the totality of the zoning that needs to be reviewed as well to make sure we're in the right legal form. So that's all gonna happen at second review. We're not gonna pick it up right before the P&Z and start going through and identifying additional issues. So the substantive legal review is happening earlier in the process, is the goal.
Okay. Because I think that most of this, it revolves around the stipulations during the rezoning, et cetera, not the technical aspect of the rezone itself, but more the stipulations that follow. That seems to be a sticking point throughout the process, and if that's what's creating our problems, then perhaps that's the area that we need to be greasing a little bit more, you know, as we go through it. And one of the things that I picked up in your report is it said that stipulations will not be modified or added after this time, which I think is the second review, unless requested by the customer.
Correct.
Is that so? That statement itself, does that mean that P&Z and council cannot make any changes to stipulations?
No,
Yeah.
that's not.
Kind of see where I'm going with that?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we state it, so how definitive is this?
No, sorry, the meaning there was the agreement between development services and legal, that we were gonna come to agreement at second
Okay.
review and leave it alone.
Okay, yeah.
Unless the customer comes to us and says, hey, we wanna change something, or can you do this thing for us? We're, you know, so that the customer has that commitment. So when we say, hey, here's your legal reviewed stipulations, the customer knows, okay, there's not gonna be surprises coming from staff from this point on. They know they have to go through the public process, though, and that could bring, or, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. All right. So then the last question around this rezoning is, there was the recent ruling in Hammer Homes versus City of Phoenix that talked about the connection to tort liability and the city. How has that played into any of this?
Thank you. We do not have all the details worked out. Really, one thing I'd say about it, that's why the streamlining helps, though, because I think staff sometimes could be in a position of potentially giving misinformation, because there are 200-page complicated development agreements from 20 years ago. There are stipulations and pages, and so it can be easy to miss something when there's so much information to provide for a customer. So I think all this streamlining effort is going to help staff provide information. But we just had a meeting today, and we're putting in a legal service request today to get some advice from legal on ways we might want to, adapt our process based on the legal case. I think we're also got some information from the League of Cities. I think they provided some model language.
Okay, yeah, because like I said, I'm concerned about, are we setting something in place that, 2 weeks from now, we got to blow up because it's not,
Yeah.
it's not correct. So, all right, so to development agreements, the question, and so I had a meeting, not related to my city function on Wednesday with three developers. And there currently is, they're not doing work right now in the city. I need to be very clear about that as well. But as we get ready to kind of embark on 2025 and the things that are potentially going to start happening is, again, these timelines and what kind of where we're moving ahead. There is still some trepidation about what is happening and how we're communicating, us as City of Goodyear. We heard about, I'm just going to say, we heard about Phoenix.
I didn't say it.
I know you didn't, I'm going to say it. We heard about Phoenix at this breakfast on Wednesday, but what I heard later that day was, had we not been in the room, our name would have come up as well, and that was kind of alarming. So I'm like, all right, well, tell me, what does this mean? You know, where are we at? And there's just some trepidation about all of this process improvement and nothing coming out of it. So whatever we've done to make these corrections, I would just encourage you to communicate, hey, we've made these changes now, kind of out. And there'll be some, all right, we'll wait and see, but I don't think everybody understands the level of effort that we have undergone. You know, let's celebrate our success. Let's communicate that positivity of it. It was, you know, I'm one voice talking to a few people, but there's the concern about, so once the deal terms are agreed to and this DA starts to circulate internally, we generally run through multiple rounds of this. I think if we look at historically, the DA will go through that. But it appears as though the applicant doesn't see a draft of the DA for 17 weeks from the time of the application, from the initial application. Does that sound right? I mean, that was how it looked to me. But I only stayed at Holiday Inn.
I mean, you're discussing deal points along the way, but are you seeing a draft agreement? Not until later in the process, but really you need to hammer out the deal points before you get to the drafting and start exchanging drafts. So that's the goal, is to push the deal points early and then leave the legal drafting till later in the process.
Okay, so it's not an abyss for
Well,
17 weeks.
No, but you're seeing meetings along the way and exchanging documentation and memos of agreed to deal points by the DAC. So that's in there. There's written communication along the way.
Okay.
Here's what's been resolved. Here's what's outstanding.
All right, I think that point, we've got to communicate that.
Yeah.
This doesn't fall into a black hole for 17 weeks, that we've got this process going through. And then, you know, because if you take 17 weeks, and then if the applicant has comments, then it appears that there's another 4 weeks beyond that. So now we're talking 21 weeks. That's 6 months, right? So we talk about speeding this process up, et cetera. And I don't want to shortchange the DA process, because we don't, if we're doing this right, we're not going to have a lot of them,
Right.
Right.
No, correct.
right? So if you're doing a DA, we're talking about a major annexation or a major project.
Generally, it's a complicated project. You're not doing the DA. There's something lacking in the infrastructure or services that we have to work through. So the problem is, if you rush, you miss something. So we're certainly establishing a process to thoughtfully work through those issue identification.
I can give you an example. We have a project right now where a rezoning was submitted, so we're doing the first review of the rezoning now. It's for a master plan community that already has zoning that was approved in like 2005. And so in the review of the rezoning, they're telling us they think they need a development agreement, but already in the review of the rezoning, we're catching the items, you know, we're reviewing the water and wastewater report and identifying any items that are non-standard. And so are these potential deal points, so we can be working with our other departments on, are these things we're willing to negotiate with them? One item, for example, is, you know, we know that there's going to be a fire station site needed. So then we're discussing that. So it's like we haven't really brought legal into the process yet, but the customer and staff are already discussing these items. There's no surprise of, we need a fire station site. Their current zoning shows a fire station site. They know they need a fire station site. So we've kind of like deal point done. We just haven't worked out exactly where it's going to go. Is there some type of operations and maintenance contributions? So I think that's what the SOP contemplates, that development services staff is already talking to them about the items that are required. And then once we get that nailed down, then we can hand it over to legal services, who will package it.
Is there anybody in development services that, I'm going to say, specializes in development agreement stuff, or is that a generalist task that everybody does?
I would say the latter, but we basically we have a really close relationship with the development agreement coordinator. So even though she reports to the city manager's office, she's meeting with our team regularly, and she's down in our area regularly talking to us. So I would say we see the development agreement coordinator as that person. And then we are informing her, like, this rezoning comes in, we all know it's gonna need a development agreement. So we're looping her into the project as early as possible. So even though there's nothing really for her to do, she knows this project exists, she's getting familiar with where it is.
Yeah, it seems to me that kind of boilerplate kinds of language,
Right.
plugged here, plugged there, and I don't want to say cut and paste, but cut and paste it, we're ready to go, would move this process along. But there still, I think, leaves the potential for either, and I don't know how to phrase it, I want to say stonewalling, roadblocking, derailing something by a component of this. And there doesn't seem to be anything other than the stated timeline, which is just a stated timeline, so we can say, whoops, we didn't make it, that holds anybody, prevents that from happening, or at least tries to limit it. So have we contemplated that in any of this SOP or any of this discussion about how do we overcome a stonewall or
Well,
crazy Ivan?
I think the answer, at least what I hope the answer is, under the SOP, is we have accountability to get the stakeholders back together and work through the issues, as opposed to just leaving it open-ended. You walk out of a meeting with a developer, there's no stated next step. So under the SOP, everyone's got to get together and work through those issues, and including, the development agreement coordinator and the lead negotiator, again, likely someone out of the city manager's office.
Okay, because I think, the horror story is, we have a traffic study, the traffic study says the road needs to be improved to one lane in each direction in a median, or 2 lanes in each direction in a median, and somebody goes, no, that's a 3-lane road, it'll be a 3-lane road 30 years from now. Well, we don't make anybody build anything for 30 years from now, we make them build what their traffic impact study says today. That's the kind of roadblock and stonewall thing that derails a development agreement along the line. And that's the stuff that I'm trying to prevent, either through the SOP, the stated agreements, et cetera. So I think calling that out and just getting that part of this move forward, because that, quite honestly, that's what gives us a black eye in this whole thing. There's no reason for that. And we've had the general discussion, and I'll just end with this. We've had the general discussion about development pays for development, and that's universal. But I think what we're finding, not just in this community, but across the valley, is development is struggling to pay for that development. And we don't want to say, I use this example. I don't want to tell my neighbor next door he's got to pay $200 more dollars a year because the developer down over at, Citrus and Cotton Lane needs to widen that street. I'm not suggesting that, but there has got to be a way for us to move these things along that allows the non-scalloped street to get done, so we're not creating those situations, but also prevents overbuild. 3 lanes here when 2 lanes will do, or when 1 lane will do, but we're requiring 2. So there's a happy median in there somewhere, and, I'm not sure where it is, but I think the only way we're going to know whether this works, whether we measure it. So I'm going to go back to the end of the day and I've been lecturing this for 2 months with other clients. Plan, do, check, act. Dr. Deming, where are we at? Well, we're to the point now where we're going to start acting. Now we got to measure it, see where we're at. So thanks for the effort. I think it'll be good, but unless we maintain accountability as a council, which is going to be future council's issue, this whole effort and all the time that these guys spent in fixing this will be completely moot if we're not measuring it and then looking at it. That's all. Sherry.
Well, I don't have too much more to add. No, you answered a lot of really good questions. Some of the questions I was thinking about, you touched on, so that actually does help out a lot. I first of all want to thank you and your whole team for bringing this forward. Because I know with how much growth we've had in this city in the last decade, you've been trying to play almost a game of whack-a-mole to catch up. And then we've got some development agreements, I know from the 80s up at Estrella, that you guys have been trying to put together and figure out where are we now. So I know this was a long time coming, and I know that this will be a very good success once you get it done. I do appreciate that. I just have a couple questions. When Brandon was talking about going online, is there like a portal that the consumer, the developer can go in and see the entire status of his project, where it is, what's been done, what letters have been sent? Do we have that ability?
Yes, we do have that for our projects. We have, if you remember, we launched Acela earlier this year, so we have a Acela customer access. It's called ACA, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what it stands for. So there is a way for our customer to go in and see the full project. It does get into, though, what I was talking about before. Usually the person submitting the project isn't like the developer, property owner, home builder.
And can they all get access to it then?
They can. They absolutely can, as long as they know how.
Can we send them out a little, this is your password, this is your login to see the update
Yes.
of your project? I think the communication is good, and I really think what you guys are trying to do is increase that transparency and in communication, which I think will be very helpful. And I think we need to make sure that we tickle when stuff's about to be due, make sure we send out those reminders to people, because they might have 6 projects, or the architect might not know, is what the mayor was saying. We had that problem where the architect was sitting on it, and the architect was saying, hey, it's city, you're not getting it done, and it wasn't us, we had sent it to the architect. So if we could make sure we get those tickled through that system out there so that they know where they're at and everything. I think it's great that you're also redoing the planning and zoning, all those guidelines. I know, obviously, some of them might need more, it's a heavy lift, typewriter repair, yeah, it's a heavy lift. But you mentioned some of the industrial stuff that we know that those standards have to be changed. Was there any thought about phasing out the different portions and getting some of those up to date that might be needed more readily? Or is it so intertwined that that really would kind of not work so well?
Thank you. At this point, it's pretty intertwined. And part of it is because due to some of the Prop 207 regulations, we don't want to add new regulation. So say we want to do something like increase our buffers for industrial, for residential. Well, if we increase the height at the same time, then there's a connection there. Hey, we're going to do a little bit of a bigger buffer, but we're giving you more height. There's a reason you're going to have an increased buffer. And so if we try and increase the height by itself and then go back later and increase the buffer, it's harder. And the way the zoning ordinance was set up back in 1999 is it's pieces throughout. So there's like a landscaping chapter. So some of the requirements about how much landscaping you might install is in a different chapter where the setbacks and building height for industrial buildings are.
So it's not just like industrial setbacks, industrial this, industrial that. It's
Correct.
Industrial, refer to chapter 4 so you're basically rewriting this whole thing.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the effort and everything to get this streamlined. And I think if we keep up the transparency and we keep up the dialogue with our customers, I think that goes a long way when people know where they're at the system. And the more communication we have, I think it's always the better. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Campbell?
Most of my questions have already been answered, but I have a couple that I'd like to ask about. Is the developer going to get a copy of the SOP?
We absolutely
You
can.
give them a copy, they ought to be able to read what the timeframes are and how many days it's supposed to be. And if we're not meeting them, they could send out an alarm. But I think that this is something that should be shared. Because at these meetings, I can remember going to one of the development meetings many years ago before COVID, and there's a lot of information given at that out there. And like they say, it doesn't always go to everybody. So for the review timeframes, once you do the timeframes and you're gonna do the review of zoning and planning and zoning regulations, are those changes gonna come back to council for us to approve them, or is it gonna be just a done deal? And I don't care whether it comes back before council, but, I mean, can y'all rewrite them and then you just act on them, or is it going to have to come to council for their approval?
Thank you. For the zoning ordinance update, that will have to come to city council for
Okay,
approval.
so are all, I'm assuming, if I can remember right, because I'm going back 10 years, we now have the possibility, or we now have the ability to pay online all permit reviews. We can see any development we've got going through the pipeline online. And there's really, after our meeting, other than when we have to meet, can we meet on Teams if we have to, or does all this have to be in person?
We offer either in person or Teams,
And
whatever
that
the
should be-
customer
That should be
wants.
great for the developer, because they don't always have time to come downtown there, or down here from wherever. Are all application fees the same amount? They're not, are they?
No.
Okay, so the application, there's certain fees that has to be paid for whatever application, whether it's a master plan community or it's a library building or something. Is that right?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Now, can they get their permits online?
Yes.
Okay, and so what year of the building codes are we using?
I believe we're currently on the 2018.
That's what I was afraid of. I asked in 2011 why we were like in the 2007 building codes, and I was told, well, it takes too long to do this, that, and the other. So if we're on 18, is everybody else on 18? Are we that behind industry standards?
Thank you. We are not the only city on 2018 codes, I can tell you that.
I know
So,
to get the codes are very expensive, but that was the song and dance they gave me before. This is why we don't always
Yeah.
update them every year or every 2 years. But I'm just wondering if we're using building standards from 18, what's the 2024 building standards today? Are we building substandard things?
Thank you. No, we would not do something we think is unsafe. And one point of clarification is the building code, the International Building Code gets issued every 3 years.
Every 3 years,
So we're on the 2018, so we missed the 2021. But the 2024 was just released, I think, my guess would be like 6 months ago. It's not necessarily released in January.
So when do you
So we're
adopt
not
it? When
that
do you
far
adopt it?
behind.
When do you adopt it, or do you just stay with 2018?
Well, that's what we are going to be working on, going to the 2024 code next year. So we'll
Okay.
start that process right after the holidays.
Oh, that would be good. That would really be good. Okay, other than that, that's all I have because everything else was answered. Thank you, Katie.
Councilmember Gillis.
I want to say, because Bill's almost on his way out, so is Sherry. And I have learned a lot from both of them, so I appreciate everything that you had to ask and say, because I have learned from all of that. So I want to give a shout out to that. Him not being here is going to make a real difference for all of us in this next year, especially with 2 new people coming on. So I say thank you for all that information. And I think the one thing that's important, because I got information on it the other day, is that the most important thing through all of this is to remember that it's going to come before session again this year, that they're still trying to take all of our rights away locally. And where we at in our building right now would be horrific if they took our rights away. So I think it's important, as we're remembering these timelines and everything, that we keep on that, because if we lose that to them, we lose everything at the local level. And I have been working some things in my own business back in the state of Washington where I come from, and they are doing that. They're doing it to local politicians, commissioners, where they have no rights. The state of Washington is making decisions in their area. So it can be done, it's being done, it could be done here. And I'm really nervous about it. And there are several developers that are fighting it right now as we speak. And they're going to be fighting it again, and they told me just the other day. They're fighting it again in this session. So I think it's important as we go forward in this to make sure we remember that, because if we don't do what we say we're going to do and keep up with it, we may end up with nothing. Thank you, however, for what you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I think you're wonderful.
Okay, with that, seems like we've had thoroughly discussed. And with that, we're gonna need, what, about 15 minutes for you to set up over in the council chambers? What's that? 6:30? We will reconvene at 6:30 over at the other council meeting. Meeting's discussed.